Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. This is Boris Tizengauzen. Today is the 27th of August. Lots of important news. In this issue, what strange metamorphoses happened to Russians who returned from captivity? How Armenia finally waved goodbye to Russia? Well, the CSTO has become covered in mold. Putin wants to turn Donbas into an exclusion zone, like in post-apocalyptic movies. And the lack of water there is just the tip of the iceberg. Why is Europe afraid to touch Putin's assets? And what parallels can be drawn with Nazi gold from World War II? Cameras in St. Petersburg are being trained to recognize people by race. And as for the Max Messenger, it's a precursor to a digital Gulag. How soon will Russians be issued numbered yotaphones instead of iPhones, which not everyone even has now? We'll talk about this and much more in today's episode, so if you're new to this channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. So, if someone asked me, Tizengauzen, show me a news story that characterizes all of modern Russia right now, I probably couldn't find a better illustration than the video I'm about to show you. A brief backstory. A Russian ghoul, an occupier, is returning from captivity to his ghoul's nest and calls to make his ghoul wife and ghoul children happy. Take a look at this video.
So, how's it going? How are you all doing over there? Oh, we're waiting for you. Did they put you up for exchange? Yes. That's it. I'm in. I'm coming home. When? Today. Today I'll already be home, in my homeland. Lesha, we're leaving for Crimea tomorrow. You'll arrive and we won't be there.
Ah, how much joy in quotation marks there is in that phrase. Did they put you up for exchange? It seems to me there's a kind of universal pain shining through. Not only did he ruin the trip to Crimea, but he also got released at the worst possible time. And apparently there won't be any money either. So he comes back from captivity alive and well. How is that possible? Where's the Lada? Where are the millions? You see, I get why this lady is heading off on vacation. Just like that, casually, they let the guy go or something? Yeah, that's a bit of a problem now. Because the soldiers who returned to Russia, specifically those who came back as part of one of the largest exchanges, this was at the end in March, but at the end of May they exchanged 1,000 for 1,000 and brought them back. They said they were just sent straight back to their military units, almost right off the plane. So they were met, put on a bus, and sent straight back. Some relatives even said that after the exchange, they aren't allowed to see these released soldiers at all. That is, even the wounded are sent right back to the front lines. Of course, that's classic. First it was the Soviet Union, now it's Russia. Were you taken prisoner? Well, then you're a traitor, and the only way to atone is with your blood. Not supposed to... Like Alaudinov, who sits there in some comfortable hookah lounges, disguised as command posts, telling people they shouldn't surrender. Take a grenade and blow yourself up. Where are you, Alaudinov? And do you remember how Alaudinov said that the armed forces of Ukraine entered the Kursk region because, well, there was a large distance between observation posts? We all remember that perfectly well, so there's no need for Orkiha to worry. Most likely she won't even see her ghoul freed. He will be sent straight to the front line. Here's a question. For those who have messed up like this, who got captured and are sent to the front line, do they get paid for them or not? Judging by that sad phrase, are you being exchanged, it seems they don't get paid. Or they'll just drive them forward as traitors, and someone from behind might even shoot them. Just like in the best traditions of the Soviet Union's blocking detachments. And also, take a look at how this returnee looks. Well-groomed, well-fed, as if he spent his time at a resort. And look at our Ukrainian heroes who are returned from Russian captivity. Of course, many of you will say that Russians should be treated the same way. Don't feed them, I don't know, maybe draw or burn the word Ukraine onto them. No. Hit them, hit their homes the way they do. This is the key difference between us and these inhumans. We are not terrorists, unlike them, although I share your righteous anger, which you will express in the comments about this. And now, our favorite segment, how to outplay everyone again without attracting the attention of the orderlies. Armenia and the United Kingdom have agreed to raise their relations to the level of a strategic partnership. This was reported by the press service of the Armenian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In other words, they confirmed the importance of regular contacts, and the Armenian side also provided information about the current democratic transformations in the country. Well, the key reforms, basically. First of all, I congratulate Armenia and its citizens on making a civilized choice. Let me remind you that the United Kingdom is what people in Russia call the treacherous Anglo-Saxons. And let me remind you, all of Russia's troubles come from them. I think it's clear to everyone which direction Armenia has chosen. Yes, now over there in the swamps, they've already started saying, let the traitors leave, they're nothing without us, they'll come crawling back to us on their knees, and so on. You know, this reminds me of how Russians behave. Let them leave, sure, they'll come crawling back, just like before. In Donbas, they used to say that Donbas was feeding all of Ukraine. You remember that myth? Donbas feeds all of Ukraine. Supposedly, Russia is a benefactor to its neighbors, and everyone will collapse without Russia. Well, as for the so-called feeding Donbas, I think you can clearly see for yourselves what's happening there now. Look at what has happened to Donbas under occupation. For 12 years, they haven't been able to install a water supply there. They can't even feed Ukraine. They can't even provide themselves with water. So I get the feeling that, aside from Putin himself, who turns everything he touches into decay, despair, and ruin, there's also some idea to turn the occupied Ukrainian territories into a kind of post-apocalyptic wasteland. In other words, to create a belt of wild exclusion zones, you know, like in those movies about the future, where gangs of degenerates drive around in rusty cars shooting at everything they see, killing for a bottle of clean water or a canister of gasoline. Well, you've surely seen movies like that. So, in a few more years, the occupied territories will turn into exactly that kind of zone. Maybe that's what Putin meant when he said a buffer zone needed to be built? Although, how do you explain that for Putin? This buffer zone basically already starts right outside the Moscow Ring Road. The Russia from Balabanov's movies begins immediately beyond the Ring Road. And after the return of hundreds of thousands of so-called, in quotes, war heroes, things will be just as they should be. So all of Russia, maybe with a few exceptions, will end up just like in those movies, it seems. In the center, there's some beautiful city where the elite live behind a giant wall, and all around that wall, all these frenzied gangs are running wild. That, I think, is exactly what the Russian Federation will become. Friends, let me remind you, right now, since Putin is being given 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and just recently Vance said that most likely the war will end within 6 months. So we understand that in the near future, it's unlikely anyone will make concessions, unless Trump suddenly switches to Terminator mode and imposes sanctions. I really doubt that. Right now, the front is being held solely by our soldiers, our heroes. That's why I want to remind you, we have a very important fundraiser for a ground drone to evacuate our wounded fighters. It's called MAUL. I'll show you what it looks like a bit later. It's an all-terrain vehicle with an armored capsule. Even in the most difficult areas, you can secure a soldier inside, close the capsule, and this drone will transport him to a safe place where medics can provide assistance. It's an awesome thing. And as I mentioned in yesterday's episode, now we can actually get 2 of these incredibly useful items for our dedicated medics. That's why I'm asking you to support this fundraiser for the 1st Medical Battalion, for our medics, strong, brave, pure angels, guardian angels who save the lives of our soldiers, and in turn, our soldiers protect our country and all of us. Let's support this fundraiser. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video and also in the comments. There are options for private, mono, and PayPal, and there's just a little bit left, really just a little bit. The first MAUL, the first drone, is already in the process of being handed over to our medics. There will definitely be a video. They will record it. Let's support our warriors. And this is what the MAUL, this drone, looks like. Evacuating the wounded is one of the toughest challenges on the front today. Together with Boris Tizengauzen's channel, the 1st Separate Medical Battalion is raising funds for ground-based unmanned systems for evacuating the wounded, called MAUL. Your 100 hryvnias can save a life. Thank you all for your support. And friends, let me remind you, in case you're watching this video not on my channel, which does happen as many channels repost my videos, here you'll see a QR code that you can use to go directly to the fundraiser and help our soldiers. I see all of you, everyone. Thank you all so much. You are simply incredible. Truly, every time I can't help but express my gratitude to you, both from myself and of course from our heroes. The topic of Russian frozen assets has come up again. And what's interesting here is that there are our friends and partners who are categorically against transferring Russian assets to Ukraine, and perhaps some of these partners, their names, surnames, and the countries they represent might actually surprise you. Let's first talk in general about the principled support from our European partners before we dive into this topic. I always say, before we start this topic, thank you to everyone who helps Ukraine. And now let's talk about the less pleasant aspects. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever have spoken out against the expropriation of Russian assets, which, I remind you, have remained frozen abroad since the start of the hostilities in Ukraine. De Wever compared these frozen Russian assets to, well, let's put it literally, a duck that lays golden eggs, or a hen if you prefer. Merz warned about the negative impact such actions could have on the capital market. In that case, other countries might also withdraw their funds from European depositories, Merz says. Well, the Belgian Prime Minister, in a significant statement, added that this particular duck can only be properly served at the diplomatic table after a comprehensive peace treaty is formally signed and agreed upon between the nations of Russia and Ukraine. So, you see, everything is clear with the Belgian Prime Minister. The main portion of the assets is held in the Belgian depository Euroclear. But the Belgian Prime Minister, in this figurative way, stated that only after a deal, well, not a deal, but a peace agreement is reached between Russia and Ukraine, can these assets be served at the table. The Belgian Prime Minister acted very, very cunningly. In fact, both leaders are saying that Russian assets must not be touched, just each in their own way. So, the cunning Belgian Prime Minister is saying that only after negotiations. But we all understand perfectly well that the unfreezing of Russian assets will be one of the key demands for ending the war, if not the main one. Of course, territories are important, but, excuse me, $300 billion are frozen. Therefore, if you don't touch them, as the Belgian Prime Minister says, until a peace agreement is signed, you can forget about them. In other words, he's saying, yes, let's talk about them afterwards. There will be no afterwards. That's the first point. So his concern is understandable, really, because in Belgian depositories, let's say, 280 billion out of the 300 are held. For obvious reasons, of course, he will fight for that. If Russian assets are taken from there, not only Russian assets will flow out, but all sorts of dictators and other unsavory people will pull their money out as well. But this is essentially an admission that dirty money is not a problem. A dictator's money, blood money, no problem. To ruin relationships with terrorists, criminals, murderers, mobsters, clans, drug traffickers, and cartels who keep their money there, yes. I don't think I'm revealing any secret by saying that some of their money is kept in European depositories. But we weren't born yesterday, were we? It would be naive to think that the lobbying system Russia built with billions from selling Russian oil and gas would suddenly disappear in Europe overnight. So, pragmatism, cynicism, profit, that comes first, and then maybe we'll cover it up with some universal human values, as long as it doesn't conflict with financial interests. That's how it's always been, absolutely always. Switzerland, which also maintains financial neutrality, calmly stored Nazi gold during World War II, including gold that was taken from Jews who were later sent to concentration camps. I looked up some information on this. The Swiss National Bank and commercial banks accepted gold from Germany for melting down and purchase. They accepted about 32% of the gold sold by the Reichsbank, so it was the largest sales channel. During World War II, everyone knew what was happening. Everyone understood where that gold came from. Portugal, Spain, Sweden, and Turkey, by the way, all neutral countries, accepted this gold as payment for their strategic imports. Wolfram, iron ore, chromite, all of it, Germany paid for with this gold. And now a few grim details. Did the European banks know that some of the gold had, let's say, a sacrificial origin? In other words, to be specific, did they understand, those countries that maintained neutrality, that the bars they were receiving had been melted down from extracted teeth and valuables taken from concentration camp victims? They knew. That is, the fact of confiscation and melting down is documented. So yes, they knew. It's important to note here that the foreign banks, of course, weren't being supplied with extracted teeth. They were receiving already melted down bars, but everyone understood perfectly well where that gold came from. So, how is the situation any different now, tell me? Putin has killed thousands and thousands of civilians, destroyed entire cities, and occupied foreign territory. But his money can't be touched because then other dictators might start pulling theirs out too. And Europe still wants to trade with Putin after this war, right? Let me just remind you how much Russian assets suddenly ended up frozen after the start of the full-scale invasion. half of the foreign assets, about 3, altogether about 300 billion. By the way, Trump, who says, yeah, we'll freeze it and hand it over. In the United States, it's only about 5 billion in total. The main part is actually held in that very Euroclear, the Belgian depository. And here comes my favorite question, which always stirs up heated debates, especially in the murky depths of the swamp. How did it happen that, starting a war and knowing that sanctions were possible, Putin and his circle continued to keep half of all Russian foreign currency reserves in European depositories? How did that happen? Let me remind you, $300 billion. Why didn't they transfer them to friendly jurisdictions or just withdraw them? Good question, isn't it? They could have sent them somewhere in the Middle East. And I think it's because they also studied history, including that of the Nazi Reich, and believed that no one would touch their assets. And they hoped the war would last just a few days, that Europe wouldn't even have time to blink. What do you think is the likelihood that after a peace agreement is signed between Russia and Ukraine, Russian assets will be handed over as reparations, or simply transferred for the reconstruction of Ukraine after the peace agreement is signed? I think the probability is 0. I think at most a year will pass after the agreement is signed, and then the first Russian assets will start to be unfrozen. Unfair? Yes. Cynically? Yes. It's how to change the situation. There is only one way. Ukraine must become a strong entity with a strong voice to begin influencing global politics. There is no other way to achieve your goals. Well, at the initial stage, regional and not only regional political unions with already established strong players. But first of all, Ukraine itself must become strong. That's a fact. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. A channel with calm analysis helps you keep your sanity the most inconvenient moments. And some people, by the way, say they fall asleep well to it, so you can approach it from different angles. The channel's healing properties, so sinful bonds. I came across a truly wonderful piece of news. Natalia Kuzmina, a mother of many children, lives in a village in the Tambov region. Her husband died, leaving her alone with 10 children. He died in the war, of course, without any help from the authorities. Her husband was posthumously awarded a medal for bravery, but no payments were assigned, saying she was not entitled to them. When she appealed to the officials, they just laughed and said, "Why did you have so many children?" Listen, this is classic. This is just classic. 10 kids. Let's be honest, in Russia, Putin is really trying hard to boost the birth rate. Even Patriarch Kirill is collecting some letters, planning to send them to future mothers. So over there, they really want it. There's a rapid decline in the population. They need more. And then you get a situation like this, which is just ugly, can you imagine? But she sent her husband off once, and since they somehow decided he should go to war, apparently, she'll raise the kids to be just like their father. And she's even complaining about the officials. But by no means is she complaining about Putin or about the unjust war. No, of course not. They just didn't give her the money. So apparently she still has about 10 more chances to get some serious money. Believe me, wars in Russia won't end either with Putin or after Putin. The whole system is built in such a way that in their poverty, they need to be thrown a bone in the form of an enemy, some kind of external threat, so that they don't look into their empty refrigerators. And yes, they were shouting loudly, almost in ultrasound, "Putin is the president of peace." So here Ukraine is periodically accused of being full of Nazis. Cameras in St. Petersburg have started recognizing ethnic backgrounds. This feature has appeared. Moreover, in the city of St. Petersburg, there are already 50,000 cameras, I was just stunned by this number, that recognize types of races and ethnic groups. There are only 6 nominal categories, and I'm thinking, where did you even find 6? So it turns out the camera and algorithm divide people into the following groups: Caucasian, East Asian, Central Asian, European, Asian, and the Negroid race. Well, that's how they wrote it? So, yeah. Previously, they planned to equip only 8,000, but now they've decided on 50,000 cameras. They track gatherings of migrants and identify apartments where they are staying. The results of the system's work have not been confirmed yet, but crime-solving statistics are expected by the end of 2025. What kind of crime-solving is this? This is just plain surveillance of everyone, everywhere, all the time. By the way, they've got cameras with facial recognition installed everywhere over there. How's the crime-solving rate there? Why didn't they prevent the Crocus incident? Well, The main function is just to watch, watch, and watch. By the way, there's a category of Russians who, say, I'm not interested in politics. The main thing is that you can get your pumpkin lavender wrath, order some food delivery, fly off somewhere abroad, and as for Ukrainians being killed, it's better not to think about that. There really is such a category of Russians. By the way, I have a very interesting acquaintance. When I worked with the RDK, well, we're on good friendly terms now, but there was a time when we worked together. RDK stands for Russian Volunteer Corps, and with the Legion too, as you probably know, and we used to close fundraising campaigns for them. So in the RDK, there's this guy. He actually looks like a typical representative of that category. A Muscovite, used to make excellent money, really good money in the production industry. Basically, he had it all. Life was good. Good money. But he made the decision to join the RDK and fight for his Russia. Not for Putin's Russia, but for the Russia he envisions himself, a different Russia. And now he's fighting for Ukraine as well. Really, it's very cool, honestly. They're great guys over there. Sorry, that was a bit of a digression. And then there's this category of people who think, I don't influence anything, I'm not interested in politics, and if I say something against it, there'll be trouble, so it's better to keep quiet. I need to install this Messenger Max, I'll just do it and that's it. So I recently came across a really interesting post on this topic about these categories. It's mostly young people, as a rule. Unfortunately, I didn't save it, but the gist was something like this. So how will what's happening in Russia right now ultimately affect this category of Russians? It all starts, and is already starting, with someone being unable to rent a car, and that's exactly what the post was about. Car sharing, because there's no mobile internet, because you needed to unlock the car, submit a request, and so on. There's no mobile internet, and this topic starts to gain traction. Indeed, the lack of mobile internet has become a major problem in Russian regions, and not just in the regions. And this topic is being developed further, with people saying that soon, without this national Messenger Max installed, it will be impossible to do anything at all in Russia. That's true. Right now, everything is being linked to it, from making a doctor's appointment to all the options in the state-to-citizen sector, basically whatever you need, taxes and so on. So for example, you won't be able to pay or even buy a ticket without it. Plus, now they're going to introduce phone number verification, meaning they'll call numbers to check whether the person using the card is actually the right one or not. In short, everything will soon be tied to this messenger. The fact is, it regularly uploads information to the server multiple times a day, I don't even know how many, where a certain officer, or rather now artificial intelligence under the supervision of that officer, studies everything. So everyone will have to install this messenger. It will collect all your information, even down to whether you use a VPN to bypass restrictions to watch your favorite TikTok or YouTube, or visit various foreign websites. Or maybe you're watching movies that are on the extremist registry. Or maybe you're watching Tizengauzen and his calm analysis. So do you understand what I'm getting at? You might not be interested in politics, but politics is always interested in you, and it will come out of your smartphone. And not only will it come out, it'll also send you wherever it wants. So imagine North Korea, where every citizen has a smartphone with only 5 approved apps, 1 permitted messenger, and a single authorized video content platform, where everything is maximally protected and tailored for propaganda. That's it. And where, of course, AI is regularly used to analyze all the data on your smartphone. And not just yours, but also your contacts, those who message you, and so on. Your entire address book, basically everything. If you thought that in the age of the internet, advanced technology, and social networks, it would be impossible to bring back the Soviet Union and a TV with 3 channels and 3 newspapers, you were mistaken. This is a classic example of the Overton window. What used to seem unthinkable? How could they force everyone to use a certain messenger, force everyone to delete something? We live in an open world, the internet, blah blah blah. No. What once seemed unthinkable, according to this Overton window theory, has now shifted into the realm of normal. So you can see how quickly the information space is being encapsulated to build this digital gulag. I guarantee you, at this rate, in 6 months, if Russians are required to take a photo with geolocation enabled 3 times a day, everyone will do it. The bell will ring and everyone will stand up. Boom. Click. Geolocation sent. Not because it's necessary for someone to track them. The Max Messenger will transmit everything anyway, not just taking 1 photo, but 100 times a day. By the way, it's already doing that. But this is an element of coercion and submission. So after a few years of this kind of conditioning, plus the basic indoctrination from kindergarten and elementary school, the psychological immersion, you end up with a generation that won't even ask, "What are we fighting for?" The bell will ring, boom, and they'll go pick up a rifle, report to checkpoint 15856, and head off to war. In other words, the ability to think critically will be completely erased, far beyond anything the Soviet Union could have imagined. It seems to me that modern Russia, although by that time it might already have collapsed, will be even harsher than the Soviet Union ever was. Well, eventually. And strangely enough, digital technologies will help make this happen. As for us, Ukraine, as they say, we have our own work to do. Ukraine must become much stronger. Ukraine must become a true weapons hub with a highly professional and powerful army. We simply have no other choice. If our European partners think that in about 10 years Putin will die and everything will be over, they're mistaken. Putin may die, but the millions who will be completely controlled by this messenger and some kind of collective Putin, they're not going anywhere. A new generation of utterly devoted slaves to the regime will grow up. A swarm-like collective Putin. That's why he needs to be destroyed right now. And you, friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and subscribe to this channel. Let's help our medical workers, support this fundraiser, and have a peaceful day, all of us. And of course, glory to Ukraine.